Now, here's the thing about fear. It's not always loud. It's not the monster under the bed. It's the quiet, convincing voice that says, play it safe, stay small, don't risk being seen. And anxiety is fear's overachieving best friend, spinning worst case scenarios like a highlight reel we never wanted to watch. But here's what I've learned the hard way. Fear isn't the enemy. Anxiety isn't a sign of weakness. They're just part of the human experience. The trick isn't to erase them. It's to learn how to move forward with them. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and stepping forward anyway. Let's dive in. First, we have to name it. Fear thrives in silence. The moment we say, I'm feeling anxious because, we take away some of its power. Research shows that labeling emotions actually lowers their intensity. I used to think naming fear would make it stronger, like saying it out loud would give it more control over me. But what I've learned is that fear unspoken doesn't disappear. It grows. It morphs into tension in our shoulders, exhaustion we can't explain, snapping at the people we love. It takes up space in our bodies and our choices. I once met a man who had been offered his dream job, more pay, more growth, everything he'd worked for. But when the time came to sign the contract, he froze. He avoided calls, delayed decisions, convinced himself maybe this wasn't the right move. I just don't think it's the right fit, he told me. But when we talked a little longer, he finally sighed and admitted, honestly, I'm terrified. What if I fail? That moment right there, that's when everything shifts. Because when we name fear for what it really is, not avoidance, not hesitation, not it's just not the right time, but fear, we stop letting it control the narrative. Psychologists call this affect labeling. When we put words to emotions, we give our brain a chance to regulate them. MRI studies show that when people verbalize their feelings, the amygdala, the part of the brain that triggers fear, calms down. It's like turning the lights on in a dark room. The shadows look big and scary when you don't know what they are. The fear loses its grip. I've had moments in my own life where fear sat in the driver's seat without me even realizing it. The times I hesitated to send the email, make the call, raise my hand, because deep down, I was afraid of rejection, failure, or looking foolish. And I've learned that if I don't call fear by its name, it shapeshifts into something else. Perfectionism, procrastination, even cynicism. And let's be honest, we live in a culture that rewards hiding fear. We say, I'm just being practical, I'm thinking it through, I don't want to make the wrong move, but what we're really saying is, I'm scared and I don't want to admit it. And that's okay. Fear is human, fear is normal. But when we leave it unnamed, we give it too much power. The simple act of saying, I'm scared or I'm anxious, won't make fear disappear, but it will loosen its grip. Because once we name it, we can question it. Once we question it, we can decide whether it deserves the final say. So what are you afraid of? And what would happen if you said it out loud? Second, we need to get curious. Fear often disguises itself as logic. I can't apply for that job. I'm not qualified. I shouldn't speak up. It's not my place. But if we pause and ask, is this fear protecting me or holding me back? We start making choices from courage, not avoidance. I've always believed that fear is sneaky. It doesn't just show up as panic or dread. It often comes dressed in reasonableness. It sounds practical, even responsible. It convinces us that we're just being careful, that we're weighing our options, that now just isn't the right time. And maybe that's true. But sometimes what we call thinking it through is really talking ourselves out of it. I once had a friend tell me she wasn't going to pitch an idea she was passionate about. Because in her words, I don't think leadership would go for it. But the longer we talked, the more I could hear fear, hiding behind logic. So I asked, is that true, or is that just a story you're telling yourself? And she paused, because the truth was, she didn't know how leadership would react. She was just afraid of rejection. And listen, I get it. Fear doesn't just keep us safe from physical danger. It protects us from emotional pain too. It tells us Don't put yourself out there. Don't risk being embarrassed. Don't set yourself up for disappointment. But when we don't get curious, when we don't pause to question that voice, we let fear make decisions for us without even realizing it. Psychologists call this a cognitive distortion, when our brains take a fear-based assumption and treat it like a fact. Research shows that when we feel anxious, our minds automatically scan for potential threats. And if we don't challenge that instinct, we accept the first fearful thought as the truth. I won't get the job. They'll laugh at me. I'll fail. And once that thought settles in, we don't even try. But curiosity changes everything. Instead of I can't do this, we ask, what if I could? Instead of I'm not ready, we ask, what would it take for me to feel ready? Instead of I'm not qualified, we ask, who says? One of the most powerful shifts I've ever made was learning to replace judgment with curiosity. Instead of thinking, why am I like this? I started asking, what's really going on here? Instead of saying, I can't handle this, I started asking, what part of this can I handle right now? And let me be clear, this isn't about ignoring real risks. It's about making sure we're making choices from a place of clarity, not fear in disguise. Because when we slow down and get curious, we realize that most of our fears aren't rooted in truth. They're just old stories, worn out beliefs, or echoes of past failures that have nothing to do with what's actually in front of us. So the next time fear tells you you can't, you shouldn't, or you're not enough, get curious, ask it a few questions. Because sometimes all it takes to move forward is realizing that fear never had the facts in the first place. Third, we have to normalize it. Nobody lives without fear. The most courageous people I know aren't fearless. They're just really good at feeling fear and moving forward anyway. I used to think that brave people were just wired differently, that maybe they had some kind of immunity to fear that the rest of us didn't get. I imagined that before stepping onto big stages or making tough decisions, they just felt ready. No anxiety, no self-doubt, just pure confidence. And then the more I studied courage, the more I talked to leaders, creatives, change makers, the more I realized that wasn't true at all. Fear doesn't disappear with success. It doesn't go away when we achieve more or gain experience. It just evolves. The people we admire, the ones out there doing bold, meaningful work, they feel it too. They just don't let it stop them. I once had a conversation with a best-selling author who had written over a dozen books. You'd think after that many books, she'd be completely at ease with the process, right? But she told me every time I sit down to start a new book, I hear the same voice. This is the one where they figure out you're a fraud. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because here's someone at the top of her field, someone whose work has changed lives, and she still feels fear. She still wrestles with imposter syndrome, that creeping doubt that says, who do you think you are? And I see this pattern everywhere. I've met CEOs who panic before major presentations, athletes who feel sick before a big game, teachers who second guess whether they're making a difference. The truth is, fear isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign that you're doing something that matters. Psychologists have a name for this, the illusion of transparency, the belief that we're the only ones struggling, that everyone else has it figured out. Studies show that we assume others are more confident, more capable, more composed than we are, simply because we can't hear their inner dialogue. But if we could peek into their thoughts, we'd realize they're fighting the same battles. There's something powerful about knowing we're not alone. Fear loses some of its grip when we realize it's not just our fear, it's human fear, it's universal. And when we stop treating it like a personal failure, we free ourselves to move forward without shame. I've started looking at fear like an old familiar companion, annoying, sometimes overwhelming, but not unexpected. When it shows up before I do something big, I don't take it as a sign to stop. I take it as a sign that I'm stepping outside my comfort zone, stretching in a way that's necessary for growth. Because here's the truth. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. That's impossible. The goal is to learn to carry it with us, to let it ride in the passenger seat, but never take the wheel. So the next time fear shows up, don't see it as a red flag. See it as a sign that you're in the arena, that you're playing big instead of playing safe. Because the presence of fear doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're alive, you're growing, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Fourth, we need to practice grounding. When anxiety hijacks our thoughts, we need to bring ourselves back to the present. Breathe, feel your feet on the ground, call a friend. Fear lives in the what ifs. Courage lives in right now. I don't know about you, but my brain is an excellent storyteller when it comes to worst case scenarios. If there were an Olympic event for imagining catastrophic outcomes, I'd have at least a few gold medals. Give me 5 minutes and I can go from I forgot to send an email to I'm going to lose my job, never recover, and end up living alone with 37 cats. Sound familiar? That's because anxiety loves to pull us into the future. It thrives on uncertainty. It takes a single worry and spins it into an entire terrifying narrative. One that feels so real, so convincing, that we forget it's just a story. But here's what I've learned. Anxiety can't survive in the present moment. When we're fully here, when we're grounded in what's actually happening, not what might happen, fear loses its grip. I remember talking to a friend who struggles with social anxiety. She told me that before going into any group setting, her mind would race with thoughts like, what if I say something awkward? What if no one likes me? What if I embarrass myself? She'd get so overwhelmed by these fears that she'd either cancel her plans or spend the whole time feeling like she was about to fall apart. So she started practicing something simple, coming back to her body. Before she walked into a room, she'd take a deep breath and feel her feet on the floor. She'd notice the way her hands felt in her lap, the sound of her own breathing. And every time her thoughts started to spiral, she'd remind herself, right now I'm safe. Right now I'm okay. And it changed everything. Not because the fear disappeared, but because she learned how to stop letting it drag her into a reality that didn't exist. Neuroscientists call this grounding, a practice that helps regulate the nervous system when we feel overwhelmed. Studies show that when we engage our senses, when we focus on what we see, hear, feel, taste, smell, we activate the part of the brain responsible for rational thinking. It's like throwing an anchor down in the middle of a storm. And listen, I get it. When we're in the middle of fear, grounding can feel too simple. We think, how is taking a deep breath supposed to fix this? But grounding isn't about fixing. It's about interrupting the cycle. It's about reminding our brains that we're not actually in danger, even when it feels like we are. One of my favorite grounding exercises is the 5-4-3-2-1 method. Name 5 things you can see. Name 4 things you can touch. Name 3 things you can hear. Name 2 things you can smell. Name 1 thing you can taste. It takes less than a minute, but it pulls you out of your head and back into your body. Another powerful way to ground yourself, connection. Fear isolates us. It makes us feel alone in our struggle. But something incredible happens when we reach out, when we text a friend, hold someone's hand, or hear a familiar voice. Research shows that human connection releases oxytocin, a hormone that naturally lowers stress and anxiety. So the next time fear starts spinning stories, stop, take a breath, feel your feet on the ground, call someone who reminds you who you are, because fear wants to keep you stuck in what ifs. But the real power, the real courage lives in right now. 5th, we have to choose courage again and again. Courage isn't a one-time decision. It's not something we wake up with one morning and suddenly have forever. It's a practice, a habit, a choice we make even when fear is still whispering in our ear. I used to believe that one day I'd finally arrive at courage, that if I did enough inner work, pushed through enough discomfort, and proved myself enough times, fear would just disappear. that I'd step onto a stage, open a tough conversation, or take a big risk without even flinching. But the truth, that day never came. And it never will. Because fear doesn't just vanish. And courage isn't about waiting until it does. Courage is about moving forward with fear, holding its hand, looking it in the eye, and saying, I see you, but you don't get to run the show. I remember the first time I gave a talk in front of a big audience. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and every cell in my body was screaming, run. I thought, if I were really brave, I wouldn't feel like this. But that's not how courage works. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and stepping forward anyway. And the more I researched this, the more I realized something big. The people who seem the most courageous, the ones taking risks, speaking their truth, living fully, aren't fearless. They've just built a muscle. They've learned how to choose courage over and over until it becomes part of who they are. Psychologists call this exposure therapy. The idea that when we repeatedly face what scares us, it loses its power. Studies show that when we avoid fear, it grows. When we confront it, it shrinks. Every time we step into discomfort, whether it's speaking up in a meeting, having a vulnerable conversation, or trying something new, we're rewiring our brains. We're teaching ourselves that fear isn't the enemy, that we can feel uncomfortable and survive. One of the most powerful questions I've ever asked myself is, what's the worst that could happen? Not in an anxious, spiraling way, but in a real, practical way. I've learned that when I actually sit with that question, the worst case scenario is almost never as catastrophic as my brain makes it out to be. If I apply for the job and don't get it, I'll be disappointed, but I'll be okay. If I share my idea and people don't love it, I'll learn from it and I'll be okay. If I put myself out there and fail, I'll get back up and I'll be okay. Because here's the thing, fear will always have a reason for us to stay small. It will always tell us to wait, to be careful, to play it safe. But courage asks a different question. What if this works? What if this changes everything? And the only way to find out is to try, to take one small step, then another, to build the muscle of bravery until one day we realize we've become the kind of person who doesn't just dream, but does. So here's the invitation. Don't wait until you feel ready. You might be waiting forever. Start where you are with what you have, even with shaky hands and a racing heart, because courage isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And you are far more capable than your fear would have you believe. So here we are. We've talked about fear, the way it sneaks in, disguises itself as logic, isolates us, and tries to keep us small. We've talked about how to question it, how to ground ourselves when it takes over, how to normalize it instead of seeing it as proof that we're failing. And most importantly, we've talked about courage, not as something we have, but as something we practice. Because that's what this really comes down to. Fear isn't going anywhere. It will show up when we take risks, when we chase dreams, when we step into the unknown. But if we let it run the show, we miss out on everything waiting for us on the other side.